there has to be a year, right? Like, this is 2020. Yeah, right? Hey there, welcome back to True North Reviews. My name is Ryan, and today we are discussing the Algiers record, There Is No Year. Algiers are an American rock band from Atlanta, Georgia. They are one of the most unique rock bands out there right now. They are taking influence from not only musical, but also non-musical media, as artists do. Musically, they are post-punk blended with 60s soul, gospel, industrial, and noise rock. Lyrically, this is where they get their non-musical influence from, as they usually engage in cultural critiques of traditions in political, social, and religious school of thoughts, typically following Southern Gothic literature. If neither of those things pique your interest, or you're not a fan of goth or post-punk, this album might not be for you, but man, I cannot recommend the band Algiers enough. I was first introduced to Algiers back in 2015 with their self-titled debut for their song Blood, which was an unconventional display of powerful vocals and a haunting melody. Moving on to 2017, Algiers released their second album and what I would consider their magnum opus, The Underside of Power. I love that album from front to back, and it would be considered one of the best albums in the 2010s in my opinion. For me, I just enjoyed how it's dominated by gothic themes and frightening soundscapes, also principally driven by percussive instrumental makeup. After 2017, Algiers waited a couple years to release new music, as 2019 marked their return with Can the Sub Bass Speak, which came out as a single in August as a non-album single. The weirdest thing about that song was how it was purposely all over the place stylistically. I didn't like it for that reason, yet it still had interesting lyrics in reference to a post-colonial theorist in order to comment on oppression in the Black community of the United States. Can the Sub Bass Speak also brought upon a feeling of confusion for me with this Algiers record. I didn't know exactly what was in store for this project. It could have gone in any number of directions stylistically while tackling any number of topics lyrically, but once the single Dispossession dropped, I knew that we would be moving into that dystopian kind of future, which thankfully the sound of Algiers lends itself very well to that concept. Speaking of concepts, There Is No Year is based on an epic poem written by lead singer Franklin James Fisher entitled Misophonia, which is also known as Hatred of Sound. Who better to bring into focus on that concept than Randall Dunn? He is a producer that previously worked with Anna von Hauswolf on her frightening LP Dead Magic in 2018. And man, I thought that would pair well for both Algiers and Randall, giving them new experiences and pushing their boundaries to a new place. A dystopian place, of course, filled with Algiers' remarkable take on soul and punk music. And yeah, they delivered on the first 4 tracks on this album with no kinks, as if they had been working together for years. The title track opens up this album, There Is No Year. We have some pulsating synthesizers on this track, along with brooding bass tones, chugging guitars, which are atonal when they're put up against the melodic vocal runs. These elements all match the urgent tone of the lyrics and set the stage for the world to end, aka waiting for the sound and fear of sound, which I also thought that idea of sound added to the social commentary of this track for how people can be insensitive to shootings and murders in society. Like, we're not just seeing them visually, but we're hearing them too. Dispossession is the second track on this album, like I said, lead single, and this one has great soulful vocal performances from all vocalists involved. The eerie backup vocalists especially send a chill down my spine. I also love the dooming guitars and crashing of drums to this cut, as it only builds onto the next song, which is called Hour of the Furnaces. Here we have sharp and abrasive guitars that crunch, while we have this experimental percussion shuffling from ear to ear. Hour of the Furnaces honestly sounds like it could have been on one of Algiers' previous albums, as it heavily flirts with dark and morbid aesthetics. And there's just something captivating about the imagery of dancing into the fire as everyone is in denial of the death surrounding them. Up next at track 4 is Losing As Ours, which has a lot of eerie synthesizers, freaky vocals that go from a hushed hum to to a sinister and unearthly shriek. The bongos also weirdly provide a quicker tempo compared to the keyboard. They almost act like a counter melody. Now, unfortunately, this album isn't without its faults, because track 5, yeah, that one isn't one of my highlights. Unoccupied is the name of that one. We have this lo-fi drum filter and dissonant synthesizers and meticulous chiming. Those things aren't the issues. Instrumentally, this track sounds good. However, there is no distinct melody that can be found on this track because of the A-B form, simply owing to the strict adherence to that epic poem that was written for this album, and also it doesn't help that the form kind of just fizzles out at the end too. Chaka is a song on this album that picks things right back up, as we have chimes and a distorted sax solo run through many filters, and it's very intimidating and unsettling, but in a good way, of course. The atmosphere on this track also embodies this dystopian future that makes me fear the end of the world, which kind of makes sense because this is exactly what the album is attempting to do. So I do appreciate the songs that are able to do that on There Is No Year. And you might be thinking, even if you're scared, what about the melody? Like, there has to be something catchy about this. And I think with these frightening soundscapes, melody can still persist on the song Chaka, as this one has an earworm of a hook that you could sing all day. Moving towards the climax of the record, we get the song Wait for the Sound, which has subdued noise and scratching guitars underneath the bombing percussion and faintly hummed vocals. The track features suspended terror that never pays off in fear. Instead, it builds tension that leads to towering and impressive vocals from Fisher. Unfortunately, even with those great vocals, the lyrics are a little underwritten on Wait for the Sound, as the threat of something coming to kill you, yeah, that kind of wears off by track 7 if you just keep saying the same thing. It's as if George R.R. Martin was testing your patience with winter or dragons coming, yet we all know he's just teasing. To follow up that teasing, Algiers throw us back into this breaking point on the album, so they call it, on the track Repeating Night. And like the track Unoccupied, there's just no memorable melody to it. What is memorable, though, on this Algiers record is the final 3 tracks. We Can't Be Found is the first of those 3. We have these filtered vocals that have come up time and time again on their previous tracks of other albums. Lyrically, the band is back on track with We Can't Be Found too. It just feels like the lyrics are more complete and fleshed out with their ideas as we outline the psychology of misophonia. Also, musically, the ascending guitar melody in the chorus is sticky and should grow on me in due time. Moving on from there, track 10 is entitled Nothing Bloomed, which is a distinct song on the project. We have these vocals that are in distress, a horrifying organ interlude, really just a dynamic composition that intensifies like a scary soundtrack to a movie. I picture blood running down a mirror while listening to this. It's just too bad that Nothing Bloomed wasn't the climax that the song Repeating Night should have been. One final highlight on this record is the closer, Void. It was one of the singles, and it's the song that feels the closest to traditional punk rock. There are panicky vocals, fervent drumming, harsh guitars, groovy bass. It even has a breakdown section in the song before we head into the pre-chorus and outro. And oddly, the upbeat pace reminds me of the song Cry of the Martyrs, which was on The Underside of Power, which, now that I mention The Underside of Power, that album is hard to avoid when we're talking about this new album from Algiers. Whereas The Underside of Power was bewitched and spellbound to something supernatural, There Is No Year is much more grounded with its social and political message. That's the key difference between those two albums. The key difference is not only this new album's greatest strength, but also its greatest weakness. I find many songs are heavily dependent on the poem Misophonia, which was written in conjunction with There Is No Year. Sure, with that instrumentally, there are plenty of highlights from each member of the band. I just don't feel like Algiers are up to par with their previous work, which is a daunting task to repeat. I don't think that they were trying to repeat the last album, but between rigid song structures and opaque lyrics, it feels like Algiers are forcing another masterpiece when they don't necessarily have to. Instead, they could have just let the deep cuts naturally grow and fall with tear instead. Still, compared to their contemporaries, Algiers are sharing some social commentary that many bands wouldn't dare to do, while managing to take risks with how melodramatic some songs can come across. So with all that being said, I'm feeling a 7 out of 10, so yeah, it's a good album. Don't take me otherwise just because I'm comparing it so much to the previous one. That one is just a masterpiece, okay? Lots of good songs to recommend for There Is No Year. You'll see those down below in the description, also along with any kind of social media links that I have for the channel. Make sure you sound off down below in the comments down there too if you want. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new in town. I appreciate all the support that you guys show me, and as always, have a rockin' day.